Good morning. We are continuing our study through the books of the Bible. We are ready to dig into the prophetic books. We will begin with the major prophets, and we will begin with the one that has often been referred to as the prince of the prophets, and that is Isaiah. There is a lot going on in Isaiah, and so a video like this, I hope, is helpful in that the book is so long and it seems kind of choppy sometimes, especially the way that we study it. So I'm hoping that this book will help us get a better bird's eye view, kind of that 10,000 foot view, to see what's going on, to see what some of the themes are, so that when we come to this book and read this book, we can have a better sense of what's happening all the way through the book. So let's begin by thinking about just kind of some introductory topics. Chapter 1 at verse 1 tells us when Isaiah was prophesying in the reigns of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. Now it seems that the majority of the book is going to be in the reigns of Ahaz and Hezekiah. And so that puts us from somewhere around the year 740 to about 680 BC. So he has a rather lengthy time of prophecy. He is contemporary with the minor prophets, Hosea and Micah. And just as a reminder, I'm sure you know that the major prophets are called that because of the length of their books, and the minor prophets are called minor because of the shortness of their books. Has nothing to do with their importance, certainly doesn't have anything to do with their physical stature. So he is contemporary with Hosea and Micah. We will talk about them as we continue our look through the books. And we see that the name Isaiah means Yahweh is salvation. And that is a term, salvation, that is going to be used a lot in this book. One of the main background issues in this book is the role of Assyria on the world stage. At this time, they are the dominant world power, and they are going to be a constant issue for the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. Isaiah prophesied at the end, or towards the end, of the kingdom of Israel. He would have witnessed their destruction in 722 BC at the hands of Assyria, the destruction of Samaria. And we know that they were the dominant world power. And Isaiah is trying to send a message not to fear them, to trust in God. He tells this exact same thing to Ahaz in Isaiah 7 as the Syro-Ephraim coalition is coming against Judah. He tells Ahaz, don't fear them. And Ahaz is going to have to deal with Assyria, that he warns not to go into league with them either. And this was during the reign of Tiglath-Pileser III. You want to get some cool names, look to the Assyrian kings. Have some great names. And then later in the book, Isaiah is going to say to Hezekiah, who is Ahaz's son, that you don't need to fear the Assyrians, who at that time the king was Sennacherib. And so this is kind of always the background going on here. Obviously, the people of Israel are in grave sin. They have turned to idolatry. Ahaz was not a good king. Hezekiah is going to go through his reforms and try and bring the people back to God, but his son Manasseh is just going to undo all of that Hezekiah had done. And so as we think about the spiritual realm of what's going on in Isaiah, we remember that in the physical realm, Assyria is kind of right there in the background, always as a threat. And then later in the book, Isaiah is actually going to warn Judah of judgment at the hands not of Assyria, but of Babylon. And we see that he is prophesying into the future of what would come about at a later time. Let's just think about a simple structure of the book of Isaiah. There's 66 chapters, so there's a lot going on. Well, we can break it down very simply if we think about it like this. In chapters 1 through 35, we have condemnation. This is against the sins of everyone. He's going to have condemnation against Judah. He's going to have condemnation against the other surrounding nations. In chapters 36 through 39, we have a historical interlude, which tells us some things about Hezekiah. Those things are also paralleled back in the book of Kings. And then in chapters 40 through 66, we have consolation. So we have condemnation, the historical interlude, and then consolation. And obviously, this is an oversimplified structure of the book of Isaiah. We can look a little bit more detailed here. And again, please understand that we're kind of lumping some things together to make some generalities. But just to see this flow of the book and what's happening. God begins oftentimes with judgment of his own house. So we have these prophecies against Judah. We have prophecies against the nations, these surrounding nations. We read about the day of the Lord. We read about judgment and blessing. We have the historical interlude that I was speaking of. We have prophecies of deliverance. We have prophecies of the deliverer. And then we read about Israel's glorious future. There are some wonderful things in this last section, chapters 58 through 66, but it's kind of interesting. A lot of times as we read through Isaiah, we get exhausted of reading Isaiah, and maybe we don't even make it that far. Make it that far. It is wonderful text. There are such wonderful things that we can read in that last section. Very powerful prophetic stuff from Isaiah. There's a question about the unity of Isaiah. It's 66 chapters, and some want to say that there are multiple authors. That we have in the first 39 chapters an author named Isaiah. They will grant you that. But then we have a second section at least. We're going to call that Deutero Isaiah, and there was a second writer, and sometimes we even break down that second section again into a third Isaiah, and you see the breakdown here. Now, there's a couple of reasons that scholars, and this is usually liberal critical scholars, want to divide up Isaiah like this. And they say that there are different emphases in these sections. And there is truth to that. But I don't think just because you're writing about different things or different issues means that you automatically have to have a different author than whoever wrote Genesis. We're going to have multiple authors. Whoever wrote Romans, we're going to have multiple authors. And so I don't think that this holds much water. Furthermore, there are a lot of consistencies through these sections that would indicate that you have a single author. The main reason that these liberal critical scholars want to deny the unity of Isaiah is because after chapter 40, we have some predictive prophecy. Isaiah is going to prophesy about the Babylonian exile. Isaiah is going to call a man by name over a century and a half before he's born, Cyrus. And in the minds of these liberal critical scholars, there is no such thing as true prophecy. And so they argue that these sections had to be written after the fact. Well, us who believe the Bible as presenting truth and factual history understand that there is prophecy, that there are miraculous things that happen, and that by inspiration, Isaiah could have had these prophetic utterances and called Cyrus by name, as we read in chapter 40. And so I'm not going to give any credence to this either. And I really like what Hill and Walton say about this. The whole case for the sovereignty of God in Isaiah 40 through 48 is built around the Lord's ability to say beforehand what he is going to do and the challenge to the idols to do the same. This is in a chapter on the folly of idolatry. These idols can't predict the future. They can't tell you the past, Isaiah says. In fact, they can't tell you anything. But God can. And so that's one of the points that he's making here. One book that you might consider if you're interested in this, I realize this is kind of a specialized aspect of the study of Isaiah, is a book by Oswald T. Alice, just entitled The Unity of Isaiah, where he argues that it was all written by one author. Again, kind of a specialized aspect of this, but something that comes up often in literature, books, and commentaries on Isaiah that I want you to be aware of. Let's think about some themes in the book of Isaiah. Obviously, there's going to be a lot in a book that has 66 chapters, and we see that there is the great theme of salvation. It is used 26 times in Isaiah, and interestingly, it's only used 7 times elsewhere in the prophets. And so we have this great emphasis on salvation, on what God is going to bring to the people even after their sin and judgment and the destruction of many of them. God will save the faithful remnant. A second thing that we see in the book of Isaiah is the phrase, the Holy One of Israel. This is a reference to God, and it's used 25 times in Isaiah. It's only used 6 times elsewhere in the Old Testament. One of those is actually Isaiah, but over in 2 Kings. And we see this great scene. I wish we had time to look at some of these texts together. But in chapter 6, we have this call of Isaiah as he has this vision of God in his throne, or on his throne, and he has all of these seraphim around with 2 wings. They fly with 2. They cover their face. With 2, they cover their feet. And they never cease to say, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord." It's only God who is ever said to be 3 times holy. And so we have this reference to the Holy One of Israel. I've heard Tommy Peeler say before that, you finish up the book of Song of Solomon, which is right before Isaiah, and you can logically ask the question, okay, what does this book have to do with God? When you get done with Isaiah, you can't ask that question. You know what this book has to do with the Holy One of Israel. In chapters 40 through 48, I've already made mention of a theme that runs through this section, and that is the folly of idolatry, the silliness of falling down and worshiping something that you made. And I think the greatest piece that you see in this section is he talks about a man who has cut down a tree, and with half of the tree he makes an idol. And this idol he falls down and worships. The other half of the tree he uses as firewood. And this firewood he uses to heat himself and to cook his food. And the silliness of that, he goes on in these other places to say these idols can't do anything. In fact, if you're attacked by the enemy, you have to carry the idol to safety. These idols are nothing, and to fall down and worship them is foolish. And then we have what are typically referred to as the servant songs, where Isaiah speaks of the servant of God who would bring justice and would reconcile the people and God. And of course, the most famous of this is the 4th servant song that we see at the end of chapter 52 and through the entirety of chapter 53. You know this section very well. And we see the emphasis of the servant songs on Jesus Christ. You'll remember in Acts chapter 8, as the Ethiopian eunuch was reading from Isaiah 53, he asked, who is the author talking about? Is he talking about himself or someone else? And Philip started there and began to teach Jesus. And so that brings us to our last point that we want to make, is the role of Isaiah in the New Testament. And you have 2 books that are just quoted consistently in the New Testament, and that is Isaiah and the book of Psalms. And a third book we could throw in there is Deuteronomy. But Isaiah is used in the New Testament numerous times. It's quoted over 55 times. And I use that number because it's a safe number. The likelihood is that it's quoted more times than that. I think 25 times it is said that Isaiah is called by name in some of these quotes. And so he is quoted numerous times in the New Testament. And if you put all the quotes and allusions together, you're talking about hundreds, maybe over 300 quotes and allusions to the book of Isaiah in the New Testament. And so you see the importance of this Old Testament prophet. No doubt one of the reasons we have this title, this phrase that's used, the Prince of the Prophets. This book is sometimes referred to as the fifth gospel because there is so much that points to Jesus here, and some have referred to it as the Gospel of Isaiah. I've said I want to do a series on Isaiah, a sermon series on Isaiah, and just call it the Gospel of Isaiah. And then, of course, we understand as we partake of the Lord's Supper, how often has someone read Isaiah 53 before we partake of the Lord's Supper, to think about the connections between the suffering servant of Isaiah 52 and 53 and Jesus Christ. And so God, in his infinite wisdom, inspires Isaiah to write to these kings and these people about their times and their sin and the salvation that God wants to bring them. And at the same time, he is telling us or hinting to us what is to come in Jesus Christ. And as Jesus would say, I'm maybe thinking of the scene as he speaks with the two disciples on the road to Emmaus. He basically says, everything in the law and the prophets is about me. And so we see the importance of studying the law and the prophets, and we see the benefit in studying a book like Isaiah. We'll pick up with Jeremiah next time. I hope this was helpful. We'll see you later.